Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
The day that you're under pressure, it's almost like you just have to bring that in, intentionally talk slower, let everybody else in the operating room have the sense that you're in control. Because that pressure, that anxiety, that tension, those powerful emotions that come out when things are scary, they're infectious.
Yeah.
So if you let that come out and project that onto your team, that's chaos.
Today, I'm talking to Dr. Mindy Lane, a subspecialist surgeon in the United States with 25 years of experience. Her understanding of how to thrive under high-stakes pressure in the operating room has enabled Mindy to also become an accomplished equestrian. In the operating room, she was able to lead her team with steady hands and a clear mind to save lives. In the dressage arena, she harnessed the pressure and her horse, Fjurie, to achieve the highest levels in national competitions. As Mindy says, the principles of calm, control and precision apply in both hospital and in horse riding. She now specialises in bridging the gap between industry and medicine. Her goal is to make a significant impact on global health through innovative solutions. Whether it's in the operating theatre, the arena or in the boardroom, Mindy believes that being better under pressure isn't just a skill, it's a way of life. In our conversation, Mindy shares when a winning strategy doesn't work anymore, how a data-driven scientist deals with gut instinct, and what happened when she saw in her daughter a side of herself she didn't like.
Mindy, welcome to Better Under Pressure. How are you?
I am great. I'm thrilled to be here. It's nice to see you again, Sara. I've been looking forward to this.
Excellent. Well, me too. And particularly so because I've never had a surgeon on, or anyone who's been in the sort of hospital theatre before. And I've always wanted to understand pressure in that environment. So, that's very exciting. Should we start with the pressure in an operating theatre? Tell me about that.
Pressure in the operating theater. There's a love-hate relationship there, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah.
I know that I thrive on pressure. I know that's probably why I became a surgeon, because of that drive, that motivation, that figuring it out. Those are all things that occur in the theater under pressure, particularly when there's somebody that's in extremis that's going back to the operating room. You don't know what you're opening up to. You don't know what you're putting your scope into, what you're going to see. When you do that and all you see is red and it's, all there is blood, then you're under pressure. You're under an immense amount of pressure. And I have always done really, really well with that pressure. I know how to dial it down. I know how to not elevate anxiety by talking quicker, moving quicker. I know how to control my body. I know how to control my mind. So it is the one place where I think that I do very well being under pressure.
Wow, fascinating that you know how to dial it down, I think is what you said. Dial down your mind, dial down. How do you dial down in those situations?
Yeah, it's funny because, the stereotypical viewpoint of a surgeon is that they're yelling and hands are flying and get this and get that and hurry and let so-and-so know and call in, yada, yada. And it's actually quite the opposite when you're under pressure. That would be on a day where you had the radio on and you felt like things were just, status quo. But on a day that you're under pressure, it's almost like you just have to bring that in. Intentionally talk slower, let everybody else in the operating room have the sense that you're in control. because that pressure, that anxiety, that tension, those powerful emotions that come out when things are scary,
Yeah.
they're infectious.
Yeah.
So if you let that come out and project that onto your team, that's chaos.
Yeah. And so does that pressure point start much earlier than the operation? So, talk us through when that begins.
Way before. Yeah. I mean, as soon as, you're sitting in your family room, you're watching your show, you're reading your book, and your phone rings and you know the number, and the number, that's not good. It's not good. This means somebody's having a problem and you're on call, and start getting ready. You're up and out of your chair and out of your pajamas and in your clothes, while you're dialing the phone, literally. Your heart rate's up, you feel the anxiety. You don't even know what's happening yet. You just know that it's not good. So it happens as soon as the phone rings and you see the number on the phone.
Wow. And so is that when you started to, I mean, it sounds like it's a training because you've done it a lot, that you can manage it in the way that you do for that particular environment. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not military, but I can only imagine it's like a military training. When you're a resident and the first time you go to the OR and the ER and you crack a chest open, you can't sleep for the next 3 days. Mm-hmm. And 2 years later, you can have a pot of coffee, have the same case, and fall asleep within 5 minutes. It's that training of kind of setting it as it's almost like here's the out of body experience, and here's where I need to be to get ready for the next.
Yeah. So
I think that's trained for sure.
Yeah. So where are you now, Mindy, in your life?
Where am I now in my life? Well, a little bit of background there. So during COVID, which seems like a long time ago, but of late, we're hearing of cases that are coming back a little bit. So from 18 to 22, I was the chair of a 200 plus provider, 23 room level 1 trauma center operating room in Michigan. And, as you might imagine, as a general surgeon, I had to really learn everybody's specialty. The dining room table's covered, right, with all of the recommendations from all of the different societies and colleges, and, delegating to the chiefs of the different divisions and figuring out how we're going to manage that, when we're going to shut down the OR, who's going to go to the OR, who's not going to go to the OR, what procedures are safe with aerosolization, and what procedures are not safe, and how are we going to prevent our staff from morbidity and mortality equally as much as the patients that we're used to doing that for. It's just a completely different environment. So that was a time of just 24/7, very high level of stress. And it was great that we managed it amazingly well. We had a 0% staff mortality, which I don't think most departments could say. But I can tell you that when I came out of those 4 years with that level of heightened awareness and hypervigilance, that became a problem for me after COVID. Okay. Because what happened is it was kind of like all the things that we learned and all the things we got good at and the efficiencies that we created and the awareness that was in the operating room. Everybody was on, I guess is how I want to say it. We were all on. Yeah. And when we got to 22 and it was kind of like, oh, we don't have to worry about things anymore, everybody kind of went back to the old ways of being. And I want to say that was frustrating to me, but there was anger there. I was angered that all of the things that we learned, all the things that we did so well, that we were just going to put them on the back shelf and not keep those in our armamentarium as we went forward. And that became a real struggle for me. And that hypervigilance, oh man, I thought that was my superpower, hypervigilance. I mean, of course you want your surgeon to be hypervigilant. And I learned later in the year after I retired that hypervigilance is really a coping mechanism for people who have had childhood trauma. And I got to the point in, August of 2023 where I just needed to step away.
Okay.
I needed to step away and I needed to learn a little bit more about myself. And yeah, put myself in timeout. I mean, that's the best way I can really kind of tell you. I needed a timeout because I wasn't able to accept that people weren't as passionate or motivated as I was. I had a hard time dealing with that.
Yeah. Okay. So pressure that had been so powerful for you and fulfilling for you tipped over into something else, it sounds. And, often we talk about this idea of stress turning into distress, or pressure when it's positive and how then does it become depleting? And it feels like there was a boundary that went over the edge for you in that experience. And did you choose just to say, right, how did you recognize that it was enough?
Oh, I think the person that I became, there was a lot of, there was labeling that went on there. I felt both that I had become kind of a bully, and I also felt that I was being bullied. To dumb it down, to accept mediocrity, to just meet people where they were or deal with what's available. And that tenacity that I gained over 25 years of the patient being at the center of being a doctor was no longer center stage.
For you?
For healthcare in America. I really felt like the system had kind of altered to let's make sure our employees are happy and they feel safe and that we're rewarding them for, frankly, for showing up, not for being exceptional, but just coming to work. And our focus and our purpose, we got so far away from our purpose. I didn't feel like I could show up every day and tell my patient that they were in the best of hands because I knew that they weren't. And at the end of the day, I'm responsible for the person that's on the table.
Okay. So what I'm hearing in there, Mindy, is that so you are someone who was absolutely able to manage pressure, turn it into a force for good when the theatre was operating before COVID. And then through COVID, you learned more about what's possible, which in a way, it sounds like it was incredibly fulfilling for you to have reached that level. To have 0 fatalities during that time is a brilliant record, actually, in terms of staff. So then so this is what I'm hearing is when your values, when you felt like what you valued wasn't being valued, the purpose, the reason for why you did what you didn't get fulfilled, or you couldn't feel that any longer, then the things that you learn about managing pressure didn't work for you.
You nailed it.
Right.
It's that when you kind of realize that the winning strategy you've used your entire career isn't working anymore, that's kind of devastating. And that's a big time in somebody's life or their career where they have to step back and reframe.
Yes. Before we go into how you're reframing, because I think that's really interesting, what would you say is the worst pressure? What was the thing that actually made you go, that's enough?
That's a little slightly emotional topic for me. And, that story is about my daughter. So she's the youngest of 3. She'll be 21 here in December. And, I had seen it before. I mean, she is what we would call the apple that didn't fall far from the tree, right? She is her mother. She is my mini me. And, I had gotten to the point where, sounds really terrible to say, but when a doctor feels like they're starting to hate people, that's kind of a problem.
Yeah.
And when I saw this coming up in my daughter. I saw it in her eyes. I heard it in her words. I was devastated that she was clearly being role modeled and becoming the person that I was beginning to realize I didn't want to be. I don't want to be that person. I didn't want to be this person that was masculinized by being in medicine, particularly being in surgeon. The distrust that I had for people, the dislike that I had for people, and just the inability to not be right. Giving up being right is very difficult. And when I started to see her and hear her, it was so impactful, Sarah. I mean, it just ripped my heart apart that I needed to do something to change the course for my daughter. Like, I couldn't help but project my feelings onto her. And I really had her looking, she got to the point where she's like, "You're right, Mom. I hate people too. I don't want to be in medicine. The stuff that you've gone through is total bullshit. And I'll be a veterinarian and I'll take care of horses because horses are, good people."
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? I've taken my struggles and I've projected it upon her. And she is so me that she is just absorbing it and saying, yeah, I agree. I'm not doing it. And I had to come back to her and say, listen, my experiences are not going to be your experiences because you will have more awareness than I did.
Yeah.
Go with your heart.
Yeah.
And she's back in medicine, right? She's back on track to go into surgery, so to be an orthopedic surgeon, that she can still be human, that she can still be herself, and she can be kind and loving. Because the things that made me really good in the operating room didn't make me really great in relationships, whether that was with friends or community or my husband, motherhood. I think that whether I wanted to or didn't want to, that projection of being in control, being good under pressure made other people feel less than and persistently intimidated by my presence, even when it was not something I was doing consciously. And I don't want that for her.
Oh, blimey. That moment when our children or our loved ones become our biggest teachers. I'm pausing here because I think the honesty in what Mindy's sharing is worth reflecting on for a moment. This is such a raw and moving example of when negative pressure not only takes a hold of you, but unwittingly begins to show up when you don't want it to, projecting your struggles onto those you love. They're powerful moments if we recognise them early enough, because they often become the moment that stopped us in our tracks and forced us to say, right, that's enough. I need to change something. For Mindy, she said, it ripped her heart out. And sometimes it has to be as visceral as this to wake us up. To begin to see yourself reflected back at you through your children can be startling enough. But when you see, as Mindy did, the person she didn't want to be reflected back, that's a powerful moment for a shift. And it's also a great example of how the force of purpose energy beyond self-interest can propel us into a new commitment. The realization that she needed to change for the sake of her daughter. How many of us can relate to when Mindy said, what made me great in the operating room did not make me great for relationships with my friends or my family or my community? That needing to be in control, an essential part of leading in an operating room, by the way, made others in her life, though, feel intimidated. This might be more pertinent because Mindy's daughter was following the same career path as her, but in different ways, this is coming up more and more in conversations that I'm having with clients. What we're practicing to be successful at what we do does not necessarily always translate as helpful at home or with friends or with our family, and can create an unintended pressure. I've had to learn this with my own children. They don't want to be coached. They don't want me to treat them like a client. And I'm not consciously trying to do that, but it takes deliberate effort on my part to slow down enough to choose. So the key question is, how do you notice? And how do you connect to a purpose beyond self-interest that can propel you to a new commitment?
I was really struck by the sentence you used earlier on about masculinized. I'm intrigued about that because being a female surgeon in a system that you have described as masculine, I'm interested in what masculine energy means to you and how that showed up in you. I think that's because, if I'm perfectly honest, there's quite a few female leaders that we work with that are having this dilemma of, quite bluntly, do I have to show more of how a man would succeed in this system in order to be recognized as great at my job? That is a very ripe issue for many people, female leaders, successful leaders that I work with. So I'm interested in that, in the way that you describe that.
Yeah, I'm interested in that too.
Yeah.
I live in the US, you live in the UK, but I don't think that it matters where you live. I think it's pretty clear that there's a much higher percentage of leaders and CEOs and C-suites and surgeons that are males instead of females. That may be because females are a little bit more interested in work-life balance, but I think that that's not really it anymore. And I at my age, at your age, at our age, right? I think that it's pretty clear. If you go to a business meeting, you wear a suit, you wear a black suit, you look like a man. You don't wear your pink pumps or your orange bodysuit. You don't do those things because it's not considered professional. I think that, well, I wish I could take back the things that I said to other women that I mentored. Things like, never let them see you cry. Like, God forbid, don't show your emotions.
What a shame.
What a shame. And quite frankly, I cut that off. Other than major tragedies in my life, I probably haven't cried for decades, because that was really, we were taught that. Don't you dare let anybody see you cry. And I taught people never use the word feel. Don't go to a boardroom and say, I feel like, because that's not respected.
Wow.
How to sit. Just how to be. There's such a cultural norm of acting, talking, being like a man if you want to be taken seriously at a table full of men. And it's wrong. And that's really something that I know will be important in my next life here, is stepping away from that. I mean, God, it's 2024 and we're still talking about cultural norms and issues that existed in 1940 and before. And it's time that, women kind of came together and said, you know what, being vulnerable is powerful. Acting like you're in control might not be.
Do you think that's very specific to the medical, the States, the US medical? Because as you were describing what women need to wear, I mean, I think there's many female leaders that don't feel that they have to wear that, depending on, the organization. Do you think that's very specific to medicine in the States?
I'm with you. I mean, I know a lot of females that purposely don't, ascribe to that, but I don't know. I mean, it's a great question. And, it's not the most important thing about how we dress, but I think that emulating men, walk, talk, wear, act like, has kind of become a norm for upper echelon leaders. And it's always something that I've kind of pushed back about. And I've also gotten flack about it. I've been called to the principal's office and said, another doctor complained they don't think that the height of your heels is professional. What does that have to do with being professional if you wear high heels or you wear flats?
Yeah.
I've been on a plane in America, and the stewardess is kind of a fun story. I was on the plane with a former surgical partner of mine who is also a female. And he said, so what do you guys do? And we said, well, we're surgeons. And he said, no, you're not. We said, yeah, we are. So, well, you don't look like surgeons. And we're like, well, what does a surgeon look like? And he literally pointed to somebody who had a very specific, very masculine look, buzz cut hair, certain style of glasses. And he said, like her. That's what female surgeons look like.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
the perception of people it's really interesting, right? And
Yeah.
disheartening. I've never worn a white coat. I think that was a little bit of my pushback towards that, And the few times that I tried, my patients would say, Dr. Lane, why are you wearing that? That's totally not you. And I'm like, you're right. It's not me. I'm taking it off. Just trying to be that, that doctor persona with the white coat and the stethoscope, and maybe that is medicine's way of, wearing the black suit, because, we know it's really not for infectious purposes, generally speaking.
Yeah. So what's your daughter now learning from you that's going to enable her to go back into this system in a way that you feel is different or is likely to shift so the pressure that you experienced as a minority female surgeon doesn't play out in the same way?
I tell her, you're allowed to have feelings and you are definitely allowed to cry and you are genuine and you can be intelligent and beautiful and kind at the same time. And I used to be the mother when she would say, this is happening. What should I do? And, whether it was well, you got to put your big girl panties on and figure it out kind of mom message, or it was the prescription. Okay, first you do this, and if that doesn't work, you do this, and if that doesn't work, you do that. And I don't do that anymore.
What do you do now?
I absolutely give her space and say, how are you feeling about it? How do you want to deal with it? What do you think the options are? And it kind of goes back to asking questions that you don't know the answer to. And I think a lot of doctors and leaders often are asking the questions that they know the answers to because those are safe.
Yeah.
Those are safe questions. So instead of telling her what to do, I don't do that anymore, ever. I don't do it. I give her space. I give her support. I'm here if she needs me. But I'm not paving the path for her. And I'm not telling her how you handle any situation anymore because I realized that was a detriment to her personal growth.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about the medical profession now for you in terms of what you've experienced?
In the beginning, there was a lot of blame, towards the system, towards people that, didn't want to work, that showed up but didn't show up, and that I couldn't give my patient everything that I felt that they deserved. I always try to put myself in that perspective. What if this was my dad or my kid, and the staff in the room has never done this case before, and they don't know where things are, and this is an emergency? I mean, this happens every day in healthcare, and it's frightening when you're non-medical person. When you're a medical person, you can call and say, hey, who's on? No, that's not going to work. I'll make a call. Hold the phone, and you get the right person there for your friend, for your family. But when you're a regular person, you don't have those opportunities. So it's terrifying. It's a little bit terrifying. And I will tell you anecdotally that there's a lot of statistics out right now, Sara, that are really gut-wrenching. 40% of women are leaving medicine within 6 years of graduating from their residency. And going to medical school is a big investment. 40% within 6 years decide they don't want to be a part of this. Women in medicine are at a 250 to 400 times risk of committing suicide. It's devastating. Yeah. And I think that this all goes back to showing your feelings as a weakness. Getting help is a weakness. Don't ever tell anybody that you have a therapist. God forbid, take an antidepressant. These are things that doctors don't talk about, pretend like they don't do, are looked poorly upon. If they do talk about it, all of these things are viewed as weakness. There's this humanness that doctors are not really allowed, if you will, to have. And that's really taking a toll. 70% of physicians that are practicing right now are figuring out how to get out of medicine in healthcare. And so what will we be left with?
Yeah.
So it's comforting to know that it's not just me, and it's also terrible to know how diffuse it is.
Yeah. And what you've described so succinctly there is the pressure of a system. It's also the system is creating a pressure, unless, of course, you choose to stay in it and find your way through that pressure. I mean, in your story, you chose that the bigger purpose was much stronger for you, so you walked away.
A year later, I think that, I might be getting close to being ready to be back into that space, because I see things differently, and I have the ability to give up being right. And I think that doctors are great leaders, because experts are different than visionaries. Doctors don't really give up being right, because everything is based in medical fact. You're not allowed to say, my heart has me doing this, or my gut instinct is that we should X, right? Because everything is evidence-based, everything is medicinal and clinical and cerebral. And now, the exciting part of what's really happening, rather than just telling somebody, hey, it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to have a therapist. It's okay to be struggling. It's okay to have these feelings. It's okay. And there's a way to disagree without being disagreeable. Instead of saying these things, right? There's neuroscience that's coming out. And the neuroscience is what doctors might be able to subscribe to. Okay. So one of the things that's really cool, and I'm fascinated by neuroscience. I think I just want to switch from being a surgeon to a neuroscientist, which I don't think is possible,
Mindy.
but I would love it. Something like 40,000 receptors are being identified that start from the heart and go to the head. Actual signals of, you should do this, or something is saying that, or pay attention to X, right? Yeah. And 100,000 that have been identified that are going from your gut, literally your gut, to your brain. So now we can say, my gut instinct, saying that has a very different meaning than it has for the entirety of our lives.
I love those stats. So in fact, there are more in the gut than there are in the heart.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I could only imagine, God forbid something went wrong and you said, well, I went with my gut. That would not go well. That would not go over well.
Yeah.
Doctors get sued, and God forbid, your attorney had to stand up there and say, my doctor did the best that she could. She went with her gut. It would be a travesty. But, finally, neuroscience is saying not all of the signals come from our brain. Pay attention. Listen to it. Allow that in. And we've never done that. So I'm hoping that, I guess on a scientific level, this is a little bit of a gateway for people to start listening, start leaning in to what your gut is telling you, what your heart is saying, and not feeling bad about that.
Yeah. So is your intention then to maybe go back with those messages and be a different model for female doctors in this sort of typically more masculine environment? Is that what's driving you now, Mindy?
Yeah, and the other thing that comes to mind is that leadership thing, right? Doctors lead by saying, I know what's right. I know the standards of care. This is what we do. This is what you have to do. These are my expectations, right? Those are very much, the surgeon is the captain of the ship.
Yeah.
The surgeon will take responsibility for the ship going down. That is how medicine is. But the best way to lead is to be the leader that people want to follow, not the leader that has the team that does what you tell them to do. When they come to you and say, what can I do? How can I get better? How can I make this amazing for a patient? How can I be part of, this desire to use my heart, to use my gut, to be feminine? Research is now also pointing out that female surgeons might be better surgeons for patients.
Say more about that. What's the research and evidence based in that?
Yeah, even the NIH has done studies on that, the National Institute of Health, and I'm not sure what it is. Is it that we listen differently, that we hear what people aren't saying, that we're more in tune to nonverbal cues? I mean, obviously there are men that are really good at this too, but maybe that's a little bit more in your femininity, having that connection with other people. And again, the clinical and the cerebral, those are the two things that really cut into medicine, chiseled, very chiseled. And to kind of round those edges, I think that evidence is showing that sometimes people are in the best care with female physicians.
Yeah. Yes, and also I think it's interesting that you were talking about the energy of masculinity, the energy of femininity, and that can sit in both genders, actually, can't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's what I think is an interesting thing to think about here is when you're responding to pressure, what's needed? Is there more masculine energy that's needed here in this moment, or is there more feminine energy? And both is available, but it's just that it seems like one's been honored more than the other up until maybe now.
Oh, I mean, without question. And, whether it's conscious or subconscious, medical students, interns, residents, I mean, they know it, they feel it. There's no question that 51% of the medical school classes are women. Why are only 11% of them going into surgery? And why are the vast majority of that 11% going into obstetricians, gynecologists? They do surgery, but that's a field that's more populated by females than, say, general surgery or neurosurgery or orthopedic surgery. The women aren't in those spaces like they should be.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, this is fascinating to understand. And I think what's so interesting about your journey, Mindy, is that you have reached a point in your career where you decided, I can't carry on like this in this system. I'm going to step away. You sound like you've done some extraordinary personal work for you, but also for your daughter, and your daughter's benefiting massively from that. So it's a transition out of a career, but now you're thinking, if I'm hearing you correctly, that there might well be an entrance point back into that career, but with a very different approach to it based on your year away. I think these transition years are really interesting for people because increasing amount of clients I've got are just saying, I'm not sure if I have got another corporate job in me, or I'm not sure if I want this any longer. I do want something else, but I'm not sure if it's this. But the stepping away is it's a scary moment. All of the things that you've been used to are no longer there, even though you've chosen to step away. So this transition moment is fascinating to me. How do you, what would you say now is a really important thing to do with the pressure of leaving something into one could describe as a bit of a void?
I liked what you said earlier, actually. Let's go back to that. You said, when stress becomes distress. Right. Yeah, I like that. And we talked a little bit about kind of that 30-70 rule, where pressure is necessary to grow, to create, to get better. All of those things doesn't happen without pressure. If there's no pressure, the protective brain is lay low, avoid risk, all of these things that our protective brain is always telling us, right? So I like to kind of say that 30% is really an optimization of pressure. You have enough that you continue to learn, to grow, to think differently, to gain new skills. And then there's kind of this yellow light, if you will. I'm assuming that traffic lights are the same where you live. Like there's green, you go. There's yellow, you either have to slow down or speed through, and red, you stop, right? Yeah. So this yellow zone is kind of like, what's going on? Why am I feeling this? Why am I looking over my shoulder? Why am I wondering? Why am I asking myself, what if I would have, or I should have? When these things start coming up for me, I know that I'm in that yellow zone. And I think once you allow, I say that with a grain of salt because you don't know that you're allowing it, but when you allow your pressure to get to 70%, that's distress. And that is absolutely what happened to me. And I will tell you, I said I would never go back. Never say never, right? I mean, isn't that what we tell our kids? Never say never, and it's been over a year. And, I was like a tuning fork that you just tinged and it was still like ringing, or a little bit of a live wire that was just kind of always on, and, worried about how people were perceiving things or what was being said about me. And, if letting these anxieties get to me would affect how I took care of patients and how I brought up my daughter and that's 70%. So walking away from a multi-six-figure salary has collateral damage. That's what I would tell people.
Yes. Yes.
And yeah, there's collateral damage, whether it's, financial, or it's your marriage, or it's figuring out who your friends really are. It is a very painful place for growth, but right. I don't want to say, but I want to say, and
Good. Yeah.
It's this place where if you don't allow yourself to get there, you're never going to have the opportunity to create something different than what you've been living, as scary as that is. There comes a point where it feels a little rock bottom-ish, and you have to remind yourself, and you have to be surrounded by people that are reminding you the changes that you've made in yourself, the changes that you've allowed other people to make, are far more important than any salary you could have ever gone on making.
If you're listening to this and thinking about stepping into a new chapter of your life, there are some key points that Mindy is sharing here that are worth exploring. Ways to step into the unknown and to embrace the pressure so that you expand, create new opportunities, so you literally use the pressure for better, despite any collateral damage. However, there are two things that she talks about that in my experience are vital when stepping into something new, and you need the courage to keep going. Number one, have ways to remind yourself why you're doing this. It's so important to create a story that motivates you, a narrative that you can call on and say to yourself when you need reminding. Mindy said very early on in this conversation that she became aware that the winning strategy that she'd been using wasn't going to get her to who she wanted to be or where she wanted to be. It's a being question as well as a doing one. This crafted story is vital for when, as Mindy says, you find yourself heading into the yellow zone. Secondly, Mindy reminds us of the impact people can have on our desire. Have people you can call on that support this new direction, people who will champion you and encourage you when you need reminding. Boosters. Limit your time with those who don't have your interests at heart, or protect yourself from them completely, or ask them for what you want and need. They may not know. Be proactive and guide them to be useful to you. Connect to what's possible and be deliberate. Own your direction. It's a practice, and it needs practicing.
What you've described is a pressure in itself of walking away into an unknown. How did you nurture yourself through that barren patch of walking away?
So, I've often been told, and it's a nice thing to be told, but it's a different thing to feel that a horse is the window to your soul. A horse can feel your heartbeat from feet away through a saddle. Can feel the tension in your hands, the vibrations that go straight to the reins down to the bit that's in their mouth. They're very sensitive. They actually know who their person is. They recognize their person. They've done research on this. And truly, I'm a dressage rider. I compete nationally. That's that 30% of pressure that I think is good, growing, doing something hard.
Yes.
I'm a 160-pound person that rides a 1,500-pound horse. There's a lot of power there. And it's all about connection. Horses don't work well for you if you tell them what to do. And you see that in other riders. You even see that in the Olympics when, the horses are acting a certain way. It's all about the energy of the rider. So, well, let's take yesterday for an example. Yesterday was a tough day for me. Some tough conversations, and I knew I needed a hard workout. So I went out to the barn, saddled up my horse, and said, "Let's go. Let's get this done. Let's work hard. Let's sweat. Let's work on the things that we're challenged by." And I got on, and he turned around, and he walked out of the barn. And I'm like, "This isn't the schedule, man." My horse's name is Fjurie. And he's like, "Yeah, well, your schedule isn't my schedule today." And it was almost as if he knew. So we walked out of the barn, down the lane, past the pastures, which we frequently do. We turn around at the end and come back into the barn after a workout. And he kept going. And I felt like he was saying, "You think that that's what you want, but this is what you need. And so let me take the reins today." And off we went into the woods. And I gave him the reins.
Amazing. God, I love that. How nourishing.
Yeah, it kind of makes me choked up to tell you that story. But I realized later that he kept me out there until my heart rate slowed, until there wasn't a tension in my hands, until my body was relaxed. I often think of myself as a marshmallow wrapped in barbed wire. And so this is like, that horse has the ability to just kind of unwrap that barbed wire. And if you're open, if your heart is open and you can listen and let that come into your soul, that is life-changing.
Gosh, yeah, it sounds it. It makes me want to build a relationship with a horse, which I've never really enjoyed horses very much, but listening to that.
In the US, horses are used for therapy for our vets, for children with disabilities. And this is why.
Yeah.
This is why, because they are just a very spiritual animal that has the ability to know what people need from them.
Yeah. And so has he been on this journey with you the minute you stepped away from your full-time job in medicine? So he watched you walk into that abyss, and it sounds like he's been an integral part of that journey.
The connection that we have, I don't know that we would have ever had I not stepped away from medicine.
Yeah.
Like my daughter.
Yeah. Wow. So what else would you put in your bank, Mindy, of support for walking away from your job?
One thing that I learned, Sara, is that through my experience, pressure often isn't the problem. It's more of a symptom of something that lies a lot deeper. And the pressure comes up for me as more of a warning signal, an alarm that alerts me to something deeper that I didn't realize that I chose to ignore. And so what we tend to do is manage pressure. But I think that our real growth potential happens when we listen to what the pressure is trying to tell us. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And also I think you're distinguishing, for me anyway, the difference between the 30% and when it goes over 30%. So there's a pressure that actually is exciting and enlivening and allows you to be better and maybe even be in flow, but feels good. And then I think when it goes into negative pressure, which you still label as pressure, but actually the yellow light tells you, no, this is telling you something else. Go under it.
Right. Whether it's a symptom, of unmet needs or unresolved conflicts or things that you've just never chosen to address, fears that you've buried, whispering truths that you don't want to acknowledge. There's a real barrier there, that, if you confront it, can lead to breakdowns, right?
Yeah.
Major breakdowns. But we also know that without the breakdowns, there isn't the possibility of breakthroughs.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think people need to be reminded that when pressure mounts, don't just push through it.
Mm-hmm.
Just taking the time to listen deeply, which we often don't do in our busy lives, and especially when you have busy careers. What's it telling you?
Mm-hmm.
What are you avoiding? What are you going to look back on when you're 85 and say, why didn't I listen? Why didn't I do that? Why didn't I take that opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
Why was I so afraid?
Mm-hmm.
Those are often things that we reflect on at the end of life, but don't take a pause midlife to say, what am I going to do to create my future that maybe doesn't look like the past does? And that's okay. And instead of framing that as a failure, framing that as a closing a chapter and, opening the book to the next chapter.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Fabulous. Well, Mindy, there's always a point in this podcast where I ask the guest, if someone was listening to this podcast thinking, I wouldn't be better under pressure, what would be the two things that you would pass forward to them from this experience of yours?
Is it okay if these are recaps of the things that we've talked about?
Yeah. You can it's almost like having a highlighter pen. If you had to put your highlighter pen under two, what would be the two that you would really want to reinforce?
I think that the first one that I want to highlight is listening to your gut.
Mm-hmm.
Listening to your gut.
Okay, let's just pause on that for a second. How do you listen? It's a phrase that lots of people use, listen to your gut.
Yeah.
How do you listen to your gut?
These are out loud conversations, because I think that, my nature is to be like, hush, quiet down. You don't get a vote. There's no evidence to support what you're feeling. Here's the evidence, and what you're telling me is going against the evidence. So it kind of goes back to that love-hate thing with pressure.
Yeah.
But, I'm usually telling it to shut up.
Right.
So it has taken a long time, and and I am not there. I'm only in the beginning of my journey to start listening to my gut. But the crazy thing is when I do, it's almost like I have a heightened awareness of my other senses. I hear things, maybe it's a mourning dove or a woodpecker. I hear things that I don't hear when I'm busy, when I'm doing things, when I'm not listening to my gut. I see things. Moss, fungus, mushrooms, weird shit in the woods that I don't see when I am always coming from my brain. So there's just something magical about, listening. You don't have to go with it, but having the conversation that says, I hear you. And, I told you before that, sometimes we have to talk to these parts and just say, okay, all right, hello, anxiety. I see you. And I am happy to hold your hand because you're having anxiety, but I'm going to need you to take a time out because nobody else in there is having an opportunity to speak. Joy, happiness, mindfulness, you're taking over and you're consuming all of my energy. So sometimes it's this crazy out loud conversation.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
With these parts that you're like, not today. You're going to have to take a time out. We can talk about this tomorrow. But, all of that is kind of, listening to your gut. And it is very hard when you're very academic and clinical, if that's your field. So that's above and beyond the biggest highlight for me. And then the second thing that I highlight is, again, it comes back to awareness, but, it is awareness of tipping points.
Mm-hmm.
If the 30% makes you great at what you do, then pressure is powerful.
Yes.
But if you don't have the awareness to know what your tipping points are, that's a problem. And maybe those two things are connected, because if you're not listening to your gut, you don't hear, you don't see, you don't recognize those tipping points. So those are my highlights.
Perfect. Just before we finish, do you think the tipping point of when you are aware of something tipping into something that is less helpful, more negative than positive pressure, distress versus positive stress,
Right.
do you think that's increased? No, maybe not increased, expanded. Do you think you can hold more as a result?
Without a doubt. And that's just being aware of it. Being able to have that conversation with yourself that says, okay, this feels like 40%. What is it that's tipping me there? So I think the expansion is, before I didn't have the wherewithal to know that distress came to distress until I was at 70.
Yes.
And then, maybe 6 months went by and I was at 60 and then 50. And I think that now I might be in that 30 to 45% zone. So it's an earlier recognition than a later one. So I feel like that's the expansion. It sounds a little counterintuitive. It's like I'm shrinking it, but that's my way of expanding it.
Okay. Interesting.
Does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. And it's actually reframed it a little bit for me, because I think behind the question, I was wondering if maybe what you would have labeled as pressure before has expanded. Like, your ability to, I suppose it's your range, your ability to hold things, to deal with things that in the past, because you were so hypervigilant, your words, not mine, it would have triggered it, that now actually there's an ease in which you're describing things now, with your gut, listening to it. Well, I'm just wondering.
I think there was only one way before. There was only right or wrong. There was just one way. And why can't the whole world see that my way is the right way? Because there's evidence to support it. And I know the standards of care, and I am the expert, and I am the one that is responsible for this patient. Therefore, I am right. So growing out of that, and really, like I said before, expert and visionary are very, very different things, is that that's where the expansion is. That's where the growth is.
Yeah.
You can't be right about everything. You just can't. No. You got to, how we were taught when we were little, like, pick your battles, right? And then all of a sudden you're picking every battle because you feel like you have to, because you're hypervigilant.
Yeah.
And stepping away from that and saying, not every battle is worth the fight.
Yeah.
You can choose.
Protect your energy. Yeah, absolutely. Mindy, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been so fascinating.
Well, I can't thank you enough for asking me to be here with you today.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.